All right, so the 2025 NFL draft is officially a wrap. And if you've been on my channel for the past few weeks, you know we've been doing mock drafts. I've been super excited about this year's draft. But with everything said and done, I want to go through each team's draft classes and hand out grades based on how I think teams drafted. We're going to do this alphabetically, and we'll jump right in with the Arizona Cardinals. So we had Arizona here, who I think absolutely hit on their first two picks. They really needed interior defensive line help, and Walter Nolan definitely fills that need. In most of my mocks, I had either Walter Nolan going here or Kenneth Grant or just one of those top three defensive tackles coming in this draft, and I really love this pick there. And another player I had mocked and drafted them was a cornerback, and Will Johnson had a crazy slide in this year's draft. News came out that he might have a chronic knee injury that could linger through his career, and I really hope that's not the case because he is a baller and a lockdown corner. And if injuries don't interfere with his career, this is going to be looked back as a major steal in this draft. So I think they absolutely hit on these first two picks. I think Jordan Birch was a great third round pick. And, when I was doing analysis on this team throughout the offseason, my main thing with them was they already have a pretty sound offense, but their defense just could use some more depth and some guys who can contribute day one. And they went heavy on defense in this draft. And for that reason, I'm giving them a really good grade, a grade of an A. So the only reason I can't give them an A plus for this draft is because I would have liked to see them go receiver somewhere in this draft. Obviously, they went Marvin last year, but outside of Marvin, I'm not really their wide receiver core doesn't instill fear in opposing defenses. I feel like, and I think they could have definitely benefited from taking another receiver to put out there with McBride and Marvin Harrison Jr. But that's how we got for Arizona. And next we move on to Atlanta. So Atlanta, Jalen Walker falling to them was huge because they really had to go edge, front seven kind of guy, and Mikael Williams was gone. So I think Jalen Walker was definitely the right pick here. I didn't expect him to fall out of the top 12, but here we are. And then they trade up again to get back into the first round with the Rams. And I thought they were going to go safety or maybe someone like, Malachi Starks or E-Man, but they ended up going James Pierce Jr. And there were some character concerns with JPJ coming in this draft, causing him to fall a bit. Some people, including me, even speculated him falling out of the first round, but ultimately that didn't happen. So I don't hate the fact that they traded up and took JPJ, but I don't like the fact that they gave up next year's first. They swapped this year's first with the Rams, gave up their second, and gave up next year's first, which I think is a lot to trade up for JPJ. But this is huge for the Rams, and we'll get into that when we get to the Rams later. But still, don't hate the pick. And they take Xavier Watts in the third round. I thought this was a great pick. I was really surprised. I thought for a second that he was going to fall out of day two and into day three. I thought he was definitely going to be taken in the second round, but really like these first three picks for him. And not going to comment too much on their day three picks because I don't have too much knowledge about Jack Nelson or Billy Bowman. But I'm going to give them a B plus. And again, I think their first three picks were very quality, but I just don't like the fact that they gave up next year's first. And then next we move on to the Baltimore Ravens. So Ravens, Malachi Starks was definitely the right pick there. You had obviously both guards that they could have gone there, gone. So next best option was either go cornerback or safety. And Malachi Starks was being viewed as the number one safety coming in this draft for months now. So they hop on that, get him to pair with Kyle Hamilton back there, which I think is going to be great. And then another guy who's fell, Mike Green. If you watch my mocks, you know I haven't been the biggest Mike Green fan. But here at nearly the end of the second round, I think you definitely take the risk on Mike Green. Obviously, he had the sack production in college, but there are some character concerns there and the whole small school stigma coming from Marshall. But really like their first two picks for where they took them. And outside of that, my biggest complaint, Emory Jones, they addressed offensive line in the third round, was a fan of that. But my biggest dislike with this team's draft this year was their sixth round. You have 5 sixth round picks, and I thought it was really, really unnecessary to use all 5 picks because in reality, when you're taking guys on day 3, it's like a 25% chance they're going to make the final 53-man roster. And I think they would have been better off to package some of these sixth round picks to move up into days 2 or maybe into the rounds 4 and 5, or even packaging some of these 6th round picks for picks in next year's draft. I just thought it was really unnecessary to take 5 players in the 6th round, even though taking a kicker was definitely a good move with recent concerns with Justin Tucker. But with that being said, I give the Ravens a B because, again, I do like their first few picks, but I just thought it was really unnecessary to take that many guys in the 6th round. And then next we move on to the Buffalo Bills. So the Bills, I mean, it was pretty evident they were going to go defense in the 1st round, and more specifically a cornerback or a linebacker, and maybe an edge. But I didn't expect them to go Maxwell Hairston in the 1st round. This was a guy that kind of climbed onto that 1st round projection area like a week or two leading up to the draft. And I don't hate the pick because I think here Buffalo really wanted him in the 2nd round, and they just wanted to make sure they grabbed their guy and just focus on some of the other positions and needs in the 2nd round. So they trade up, get Maxwell Harrison, who I think could be a good corner. And then they take TJ Sanders in the 2nd round, trading up with the Bears. And I really like that pick. They needed some D-line help here. And TJ Sanders in January was a projected top 20 pick. So this is really good value here in the 2nd round. He was a baller at USC last year. And then I didn't really like the Landon Jackson pick for him in the 3rd round. Thought they could have gone some other directions there, even if they wanted to go edge. And I didn't like the Jackson Hawes pick, Georgia Tech tight end. And I didn't like the Chase Lund pick for this team. So overall, I thought they had a solid days 1 and half a solid day 2, but I wasn't the biggest fan of their day 3. And for that reason, I'm just going to give them a B-. I don't think this was a horrible draft by any means, but in my opinion, at least, I thought there were some questionable decisions there throughout this draft. And then next we got the Carolina Panthers. So I thought my boys here were going to take Jalen Walker or Mikael Williams this whole offseason. Obviously, T-Mac was speculated here and there, but I didn't think ultimately we'd go receiver. I thought our offensive staff had more faith in our receiving core coming into the season, but they take T-Mac, which I don't hate now that I've had some time to think about it. They've gotten what's supposed to be the number 1 receiver in this class, and hopefully can be a Mike Evans kind of true alpha receiver weapon for Bryce. And then in the next 2 rounds, they addressed the biggest need on this team, which was their defense, specifically their front 7. So Nick Scorton, this was a guy that could have gone end of 1st round. They get him in the middle of the 2nd round, which I was a big fan of. They traded up with Denver. And then in the 3rd round, they got Princely from Ole Miss, who had 10.5 sacks last year. I think was tied 10th in college football last year for sacks. And this was a guy that was a projected end of 2nd round pick, and we got him at the mid-end of the 3rd round. So I love the value on both these guys. And then Trevor Etienne was a pretty questionable pick, but I can kind of see what they were getting at with Rico Dowdle only on a 1-year deal and Jonathan Brooks' knee concerns being a big deal. Didn't like the Mitchell Evans pick. Cam Jackson pick, I'm pretty indifferent on. Love the Lathan Ransom pick. He had one of the highest rated pass or run stopping capabilities in college football as a safety last year. He had something like 4.5 sacks, a couple interceptions, 75 tackles. So Panthers' run defense was horrible last year, and we really needed a safety back there with Moehrig. So I think this was a solid pick on day 3. And then I love the Jimmy Horn pick. I'm not saying he's going to be like a solid contributor on the offense, but I think he can make a difference on special teams as a returner and find himself playing on that offense here and there and getting some snaps. So overall, I think the Panthers did a good job of addressing some needs, had some questionable picks here and there, but I think they got better after this draft, and I'm going to give them an A-. So then next we move on to the Chicago Bears. So I thought the Chicago Bears took a pretty interesting approach to this draft. I was pretty certain they were going to go tight end at 10 if Membu and Kelvin Banks were gone, which ended up being the case. But I did not think they'd go Colston Loveland. I thought they'd go Tyler Warren. But this is Ben Johnson's offense now, and their coaching staff and scouting department must have had Colston Loveland as their number 1 tight end for this draft. So, I mean, if that's their guy, that's their guy. I'm not on the scouting department. I'm not going to say one pick was better than the other. But this does lower my grade for them a bit because I do think Tyler Warren was the better tight end prospect coming into this draft. And then they went Luther Burden in the 2nd round. And I didn't like them going receiver because they already have a crowded receiver room, and also you add another pass catcher in Colston Loveland. But that Quinshon Judkins was gone and Travion Henderson were gone. I think if either one of these Ohio State running backs were there at 39, they definitely would have gone running back. But I think here they just wanted to keep adding to that Caleb Williams arsenal and Ben Johnson offense, and they just took Luther Burden, who didn't have the best year last year at Mizzou, but was a projected top 10 pick coming into last year. And there is upside here, but I just am not the biggest fan of this pick considering the again crowded wide receiver room. I think they would have been better off going offensive tackle here because that's a big need for this team, or maybe an edge. But they do address tackle with Ozzie out of Boston College later in the second round. Not the biggest fan of this pick because I don't think there's much upside other than he is like 6'8" and he's got that physical upside, but I don't think the play translates to him being a second round pick. And I'm not the biggest fan of their late picks in this draft. I think they kind of missed out on getting that premier tackle and premier running back in this class. So overall, I do like that they went tight end in the first and Shamar Turner again with another one of their second round picks. But overall, not the best draft in my opinion, and for that reason, I'm going to give them a C. So next we move on to Cincinnati Bengals, and we all know, even if you watched 2 football games last year, you know that this team needed defense. And another need for them was guard. So that's what they did with their top 3 picks. They took Shamar Stewart in the first round. This guy doesn't have the numbers to back up being a first round pick with only 4.5 sacks throughout his Texas A&M college career, but he's got probably the highest physical upside out of all the guys except maybe Abdul Carter. This guy's huge. He had a really impressive combine, and for a team that needs desperate help on this defense, I don't hate taking a swing on a guy like Shamar Stewart at 17. And then in the second round, they get a baller in D Knight. This guy was a beast and a force at USC last year, really hard worker, and again, just beefing up this front 7. You just don't know what's going to happen to Trey Hendrickson, so you just want to get guys in that front 7 that can make a difference. And then the third round, again, I said one of their needs was guard, and they addressed that need through Dylan Fairchild. And I'm pretty indifferent on their other picks on day 3, but again, they address positions of need. And I've seen people absolutely rip this draft, giving them grades of like D's and F's, but I'm probably going to give them a higher grade than most of these people because I do think they at least address the needs. Like, we don't know if any of these players in this draft are going to pan out or be busts, but they address their needs with guys they like, and they're hoping they can make a difference on this team. So for that difference, I'm going to give them a B-. They're going to join this tier with Buffalo. So then next we go to team Cleveland Browns. So obviously they were in the news heavy with this draft, with first trading back in the first round, and then with the whole Shedeur Sanders pick and everything. So I love the trade back for him. Obviously, I think Travis Hunter is a better player than Mason Graham, but considering they got first from Jacksonville for next year, from a team who could potentially be bottom 10 again, and they add another second round pick in this draft, I really love it. So they do get Mason Graham in the first, which I think was the right pick at 5. This guy could be a force with Myles Garrett there on the D-line. And then Carson Schlesinger, which I didn't expect him to go at the top of the second round, but I don't hate this pick because he was going to be a second round pick, and he has a really high football IQ, and he was definitely the second best off-ball linebacker in this draft. So you got him out of UCLA, and then I love their Quinshon Judkins pick. They really desperately needed a running back on this team with the whole Nick Chubb aging and injury concerns. So I think they definitely made the right picks here. And then loved Harold Fannin Jr. This is essentially going to be their David Njoku successor, a big body receiving tight end who could definitely be a real weapon for this team in a year or two. But this is where I did not like what they did. I didn't like the Dylan Gabriel pick, and then I thought if you're going to take Shedeur, there was no need to take Dylan Gabriel. You already have a really, really goofy quarterback room with Deshaun Watson, Kenny Pickett, Joe Flacco, and now you're adding 2 more guys. Like, realistically, 5 guys are not going to make the final roster, and 4 guys might not even make the final roster. So I thought this was a waste of a third-round pick, in my opinion. I love the Dylan Sampson pick for them in the 4th round. Again, adding to this running back room, which was a need for this team. I still really, really love this draft for the Cleveland Browns. I'm going to give them an A-, but I do think they fumbled this quarterback situation with bringing in 2 extra guys. 1, Dylan Gabriel, I'm not a fan of, and 2, bringing Shedeur, who's going to bring in some unwanted media attention and baggage to this team. But overall, again, I think this team got better after this draft, added some future draft capital, and if I was a Browns fan, I'd definitely be happy with the direction this team took overall. So the next we got the Dallas Cowboys. So this is a team we weren't sure if Jerry was gonna ruin the future of this team more, or actually make the right picks. But hey, Cowboys fans, I think you guys did really, really good in this draft. So Tyler Booker was a little high at 12, but at the end of the day, they got potentially the best guard in this draft and a guy who could be a staple for that Dallas O line for years to come. With T-Mac gone there, I think that was going to be their pick at 12 if he was there, but he wasn't, and you got to work with what the cards you're dealt, and Tyler Booker was that card. And then you move on to the second round, and I absolutely love their second and third round picks. Day two was a huge success for the Cowboys. You got Donovan Ezeraku, who I think should have been a pick at the end of the first round, but he falls here to Dallas, and this was a home run pick. You needed a guy on the edge, and Ezeraku has the potential to be a very, very good, potentially a top 5 edge coming out of this class. And then you got Siobhan Revel. This was a guy that was projected first round all year, but then again, he tore his ACL last year, has some injury concerns. We saw this with Jonathan Brooks last year. Panthers took him in the second round, had a torn ACL and retore it, and is now potentially out for all of next year too. But Rebel's got that frame to be a really good cornerback in this league. And again, cornerback was a need for this team. And if he's sitting there in the third round, you have to take the risk. So love these first 3 picks. Love the Jaden Blue pick. I'm not saying he's going to be their RB1, but he brings in a really dynamic pass catching and rushing ability at the running back position. And in the 5th round, you can't go wrong. And then I like a lot of their later picks too. I mean, I'm not saying all these guys are going to contribute, but you bring in some depth and potential rotational pieces at positions of need. So really, I know the media probably wanted the Cowboys to have a really bad draft so they could bash them, but I really like this draft for them, and they're going to get our first A+ in my grading list. So the next we move on to the Denver Broncos. So I think the Broncos surprised a lot of people, including myself, with their first round pick. I was fully expecting them to go Omarion Hampton and add to that running back room because that O-line is filthy, and by adding a dynamic running back to that offensive line, you're just making this team a whole lot better. But they go Jahdae Barron, and I don't hate this pick. He was the first corner taken, and I think he's going to be a really good corner. And pairing him with Patrick Surtain is a nightmare for any opposing receiving core or quarterback. You have 2 potential lockdown corners, one of them being the defensive player of the year last year in that backfield or in that secondary, and that's going to cause issues for offenses. So I think great pick in the first round, and then they do address the running back position in the second round with RJ Harvey. I think RJ Harvey could be insane for the Broncos. This guy's stats at UCF the last 2 years were ridiculous. Just watch his highlights, look at his stats, watch his film, and you pair him with this offensive line and this offense, and we're going to have some issues, I think. And then they go Pat Bryant in the third round. So the Broncos coaching staff was giving him comps to Michael Thomas. They think really highly of this guy, and receiver was definitely a position they could take with Cortland Sutton being on the last year of his contract, and him and Marvin Mims being only the really 2 serviceable weapons. I know you have Devon Vele, who had a pretty good year, but I think wide receiver was definitely a need. So like that, they take Savion Jones, edge out of LSU. I think him and Swinson were both really good prospects for days 2 and 3 coming out of LSU on that edge position. And yeah, I mean, their later round picks, not going to comment too much on them, but I think they did a good job overall. And I'm going to give the Broncos a solid B+ in this draft. I think they definitely addressed positions of need and got better to an already really good team. But next we got the Detroit Lions. So I'll start out by saying I don't hate the Tyleik Williams pick. I think he can be a really good player, and they needed to go D-line. But I really, really would have liked to see this team go edge, especially Donovan Ezeraku. I think him and Hutchinson would have been nightmares for opposing quarterbacks. But ultimately, they go Tyleik Williams, and then they go Tate Ratledge in the second round, which I love. This was a guard that was definitely second round worthy, and I think could definitely fix a position of need for this team. And then their third round pick, I'm not the biggest fan of, Isaac Tesla. He's got that like 6'4", 6'5" frame, and I know the Lions coaching staff thinks really highly of him coming out of Arkansas here, but he doesn't have the numbers to back up a third round pedigree here, and I'm just not super impressed by what I see on film for this guy. But again, I'm not the scouting department for this team. I'm not the coaches. So if they like him, they like him. But it's definitely going to impact my grade for this, paired with the fact that they didn't go what I think would have been the perfect pick for him in the first round. I think they overall had a decent draft, but again, for the reasons I just stated, I'm only going to give them a B. I can't go much higher than that. And then next we got the Green Bay Packers. So the Packers finally stopped beating around the bush at the receiver position and took a guy in the first round and a good player for that matter, in Matthew Golden. I think a lot of people had him as their consensus wide receiver 2 in this class. But he ended up being the third wide receiver taken, and I think this was a great spot for him to go. So that was huge. And then another two big positions of need for this team were cornerback and edge, but they didn't address that on day 2. I didn't really like the Anthony Belton pick out of NC State. I just don't think he provides that upside at this position of the draft. I think they would have been way better off here going someone like Trey Amos or just an edge here. I just think they could have gone, like I said, cornerback is a huge position of need for this team, and they didn't take another one until the 7th round. You don't know what's going to happen with Jair this year, and I just think you needed some insurance there. So I think that significantly negatively impacts my grade for them. And then I don't like them going receiver again in the 3rd round. This team already has 3 to 4 second to 3rd round wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 kind of guys. And I think Saquon Williams is just that. You're just crowding this receiver room more with guys who I don't think make a weekly contribution. Like I think Matthew Golden can. So overall, and then I do appreciate they went edge in rounds 4 and 5 here, but I think they could have done that a lot earlier in this draft and taken another receiver if they really needed to later in this draft. But for that reason, I have to give Green Bay a C+. I think they could have had a way better day 2 and really improved this team. Next, we move on to the Houston Texans. So the Texans traded back with the Giants, and I think they kind of played themselves by doing that. I think they expected a guy like maybe Josh Simmons to be there at that 2nd round pick they got from the Giants. But obviously that's not what happened. And I think another guy they thought might have been there for them at that pick was Jonas Saviane. I always butcher his last name, but that didn't happen for him either. So I think they kind of have to settle for Ursary here at 48. Oh no, my apologies. I thought that they thought Josh Simmons would be there at 33 or possibly Josh Cornerly. I think they were pretty confident one of them would have slipped there to their pick here at 34, but that obviously wasn't the case. So that's when they had to settle for Ursary later in the 2nd round, who I think could still be a good tackle, but I think Josh Simmons and Connerly have a way higher ceiling and are kind of like those borderline or definite end of 1st round kind of guys. So they settle for Jaden Higgins, which I don't hate because I think he'll complement Nico Collins really well. He's got the big frame, and I was pretty confident he's going to be a 2nd round guy because I thought teams would bank on that athletic upside. So they do just wide receiver and tackle, but then I thought it was really interesting they went with the other Iowa State receiver in Jalen Noel. I don't know, man. I just don't really agree with taking 2 receivers here. I just think, again, with fumbling the whole offensive tackle situation, and they could have likely still got out with Jaden Higgins or Jalen Noel and a better tackle. I can only give this team a B-. Not like I'm not trying to bash on their draft. I think there's a lot of potential here on improving this offense, and their defense is already really solid, and they added another corner, but not my favorite draft, but not my least favorite draft. So I think a B- is fair here. And then you got Indy, you got the Colts. So this was the dream scenario for them in the first. Tyler Warren at 14, huge position of need. It was tight end and front 7, and they got who I thought was the number 1 tight end coming into this draft. And then you take an edge in the 2nd round. I think Tuimoloau is a pretty solid pick in the 2nd round, but I think there were guys that they could have banked on the higher upside for. Obviously, Ezeraku would have been a dream scenario for them at 45. But I think they could have gone Nick Scorton here at 45. I think they could have gotten Mike Green there at 45. But hey, they addressed a position of need. Could have been even a linebacker like D Knight would have been nice because they do need a linebacker. But I still think, again, addressing positions of need, huge. Take a corner, that's good. Riley Leonard, 6th-round cornerback, low risk. If AR is not looking good, you could give this guy a shot, like week 10 or something. Overall, not a bad draft. I think taking a running back was nice in the 5th round. Have a guy back there with JT. But I'm going to give them a B+. Again, I love their 1st-round pick, and addressing positions of need is huge. And can't complain too much about this draft. So next we got the Jacksonville Jaguars, who off the bat traded up to the pick number 2 in this class, Travis Hunter. So this is a team that doesn't really have a lot of star power. You got Josh Hines-Allen, you got BTJ, I guess you got T-Law, but adding Travis Hunter gives them a cornerstone piece on potentially 2 sides of the ball, but at the very least, a very good player on either offense or defense. So I know they gave up their 1st next year, but this is a division that's winnable for this team if things fire on all cylinders with this new coaching staff and regime. So I think just them trading up for Travis Hunter and taking that swing significantly boosts my evaluation for this draft for him. I thought the Wyatt Millen pick was a steal in the 3rd round. I thought he could definitely got in the 2nd round. He wasn't going to make it past the 3rd round, and I thought this was a great spot for him. Again, beefing up this O-line. I think the Caleb Ransaw pick in the 3rd round, 2 cornerback out of Tulane. There's some potential there. I'm not very familiar with his game. I've seen some of his highlights, but I'm not gonna hate on the pick. If they liked him, they liked him. Again, another potential position of need, or definite position of need that could be filled with Caleb Ransaw. I didn't really understand taking another running back here in the 4th round. It's already a very questionable running back room, but I guess if you're exploring the trade of ETN, this makes sense. I thought Jack Kaiser was a really solid pick in the 4th round. He really balled out at Notre Dame, was one of the standout players on that Notre Dame front 7. And then overall, again, adding some more guys on defense here in the later rounds and O-line. So overall, I think this is a really good draft for the Jags and really making a bold statement with that trade with this new regime. So I'm going to give them an A-. And then next we got the Kansas City Chiefs. So there's a saying I know you guys have heard before. It's the rich get richer. And man, the rich definitely got richer in this draft. Josh Simmons falling to them at 32 was a godsend. They needed trenches. They needed to address the trenches on both sides of the ball, and they do that with a tackle who could end up being the best tackle in this draft in this Kansas City system. So home run pick. And then you got Omar Norman Lott, another guy, again, on the trenches on the defense side of things, falling to them at 63 out of Tennessee, another home run pick. If they had just came out of this draft with these 2 guys alone, it would have been an A. But then you come around here and they land Jalen Royals in the 4th round, a guy who a lot of people thought would be gone by the end of the 3rd. So this was a really good class for the Kansas City Chiefs. It looks like they're going to have guys that are going to make an impact come year 1. So I have to give them an A+. This is a team retooling to hopefully win the Lombardi next year. And then next we got the Raiders, another team in that division who I thought had a really good draft. So we knew, there was some speculation Genty might go earlier than 6, but ultimately he goes to the Raiders at 6. Obviously, generational talent here, running back, a guy who can make a massive difference on this offense, paired with Brock Bowers now. So Genty, home run pick. They take a receiver in the 2nd round, which I think was a great decision in Jack Beck. They definitely needed to address that position, get some more weapons out there for Geno or whoever the quarterback might be next year. So that's their guy. They take him. And then Charles Grant in the 3rd round, great pick. This was a guy that only started playing football, I think, 5 or 6 years ago, but has some crazy upside coming out of William & Mary. He has looked really good, again, for playing football for only a small amount of time. And with the right development, this guy could be a definite cornerstone piece as O-line for years to come. Tonka Hemingway, great pick to beef up that interior D-line. This is another guy who really contributed to that insane South Carolina defensive line last year. Again, just a lot. They used their picks wisely in this draft. They got guys like Darian Porter, Tonka Hemingway, Charles Grant, just people who can be rotational pieces for this team or be contributors come year 1. So, and I do like, again, low-risk quarterbacks in the 6th round. Gino is got that extension. He's the guy for the time being, but they're going to explore quarterback next year, I think, or even sooner than that. So again, really good draft, and I, as a Raider fan, or if I was a Raider fan, I'd be really happy pairing this with a new head coach in Pete Carroll. So yeah, they get an A for that. And then next we move on to another team in this division who I thought had a really good draft, and that's the LA Chargers. So I think the Chargers would have loved for Loveland or Warren to be there at 22, but it was looking very unlikely that was going to happen. So this team's mission coming in this draft was 100% improve this offense for Herbert. You had Lad McConkey last year and a decent running back duo that got the job done on a run-heavy team, but you got to add more talent around this offense to really be a contender here in the AFC against teams like Kansas City and Buffalo. But Amari and Hampton, Steelers passing on him, Broncos passing on him, you have to take him at 22. I know you brought Najee in, who's going to be great, I think, on this offense, but now you have a really solid 1-2 punch. You can ease Amari and Hampton into the NFL. And again, 1-year deal for Najee. If you don't want to pay him the money next year, you have a good running back on a really good rookie contract. Then they come around in the second round, address receiver, get Trey Harris. Again, this is a guy who I think could have some significant impact on this team, paired with Lad McConkey. So like that pick. Kyle Kennard in the fourth round, another guy. If you didn't watch college football last year, more specifically SEC football, you wouldn't know that the South Carolina defensive line in front seven was maybe the best, if not the best in the SEC last year. And a big reason was Kyle Kennard, SEC Defensive Player of the Year. Getting him in the fourth round, huge dub. Again, they needed some help on the interior. They got Caldwell out of Oregon, added another receiver in the fifth round coming out of Auburn. So overall, I think this is a really good draft class for the Chargers that should improve this team and more specifically this offense. So for that reason, I'm definitely going to give them an A-. So we've been handing out a lot of A's in over the last 3 or 4 picks, but I promise you we're gonna move away from that with this next one. So I think the Rams I was pretty disappointed in their draft. I do love, again, they added that first round pick from Atlanta, and with Stafford getting old and potentially in his last year or two, I think 2 first round picks next year could be huge to potentially trade up if need be to grab a quarterback in a really, really good quarterback class, or at least it's shaping up to be a really good quarterback class. So I didn't understand the Terrence Ferguson pick in the second round. Again, this is a team that really needed to patch some holes on the defense especially, and they don't really utilize their tight ends. And they took a tight end who's not polished at run blocking or pass blocking, so that's already going to limit his minutes off the bat. And he's not he's a receiving tight end, but he's nothing crazy. So I'm not a huge fan of this pick for a team that, again, doesn't use their tight ends. I thought Josiah Stewart was a pretty good pick in the third round. They needed a linebacker, and he had some pretty promising games over there in Michigan. But then again, in the fourth round, you go running back, and I know a lot of people were speculating they'd take a running back, but considering you didn't patch a lot of holes in that secondary and front seven, I would have gone defense here. And I thought Chris Paul was a potential upside pick here on day 3. But overall, I think this is a lackluster draft for the Rams. But I will say with the caveat that the Rams are a really competent team with McVay and a really competent front office. So it's hard for me to question a lot of what their decisions, because I think they will be fine at the end of the day. But I'm not that happy. As a Rams fan, I wouldn't be like, dang, we had a crazy good draft or anything. So for that reason, I have to give them a D. Just not the biggest fan of this draft. But I love them adding that first round pick for next year. So then next we go to the Miami Dolphins. This was a team that definitely needed to beef up that O-line and D-line and potentially their secondary. So they do that in the first round with Kenneth Grant. I definitely thought he was going to go top 20 in this draft, top 22. 13 was earlier than expected, especially over Walter Nolan, but I don't hate it. I think he has all the tangibles he has all the traits to be a really good DT in this league. And then they go guard in the second round. This is a pretty versatile O-lineman, and again, addressing that need of offensive line. Jordan Phillips, addressing the need of the defensive line. Go corner, go safety, the secondary. Ollie Gordon, I think, was a pretty solid pick. You got Mostert gone with the Raiders now. You bring in Ollie Gordon, who could potentially be that RB2 with Achane back there. Quinn Ewers, don't hate it. Again, low-risk pick in the 7th round. And with Tua's injury concerns, you could maybe have a guy who develops and at least a serviceable backup. So overall, I thought this was a pretty solid draft for the Dolphins, and they just did what they needed to do, but they didn't do anything super. Like they didn't bring in like any crazy value superstars anywhere. So for that reason, I'm gonna give them a B. Really solid draft though. And then next we got the Minnesota Vikings. So I had to be not too critical with this team's draft because they didn't have a lot of draft capital. Obviously, as you can see, they had the first one day two pick and then only three picks on day three. But I love Donovan Jackson, really good pick, addressed a big position in need. I thought for sure they were going to go safety, but Donovan Jackson's another versatile offensive lineman who can definitely be a cornerstone guy for this O-line. So not going to hate on that pick. I think Ty Felton could bring in some potential there in the receiving core. But just considering they didn't have a lot of picks, and I would have liked them to see E-Man Warrior or something like that at 24 or Malachi Starks, I'm going to have to give this team just a C-. And again, I think if they had some more picks under their belt, they'd have had a better draft. So not hating on it. It's hard for me to give them higher than that considering the low draft cap. And then next you got the New England Patriots. So I know this is a lot of people's favorite draft class. So I mean, Will Campbell was the pick at 4. There was no one they should have gone over him there. That was just the right pick. But my issue here is that when I look at the guys taken 1 through 6 outside of him, I think the other 5 guys are just more superstar. Like obviously he's an O lineman, so he's gonna suffer from that. But those guys seem more like superstar, potential generational kind of guys. Where hopefully Will Campbell's just that really solid anchor for that O line for the next decade. At a really like they needed that to protect Drake May. But that just takes away a little bit for me from their final grade. Trayvon Henderson, great pick. Kyle Williams, great pick. So the rest of this draft was really good. They just did what they needed to do. They brought in a running back and on a running back needy team. They brought in a receiver on a very needy wide receiver team. Obviously added some more O-line. Jared Wilson is probably a day 1 starter for them at the center position. Braden Swinson in the 5th round was a steal. Again, one of those LSU edge kind of guys who's just going to really contribute. Joshua Farmer is probably going to be a rotational piece for this team coming in from the 4th round. And man, honestly, like they just did everything they needed to do. But you could give them an A- or an A, but I'm just going to give them a B+. Because again, I just think looking at like guys like Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter, Cam Ward, even Mason Graham, and obviously Genty, those guys just like stand out more than Will Campbell to me, especially considering you got guys like Josh Simmons going at 32, or even Membu at 7, or Kelvin Banks at 9. So that they're going to suffer when I give out my grade just by a little bit for that. But again, hey, Pats fans, you definitely took a massive stride in the right direction of this draft class, and I'm not trashing it by any means. Next, you got the New Orleans Saints. This was a team I did not really. It was hard for me to pinpoint what they were going to do in the first round, but it came down to I thought they would go offensive line, or someone like Jalen Walker, or someone like Will Johnson. And I think Kelvin Banks here was a great pick. This is going to be an anchor type of guy for that O-line at the tackle position for whatever quarterback for years to come, hopefully. I really like their draft, especially with guys like Devin Neal in the 6th round, which was a steal. But what I didn't like, which is going to make their grade go down a lot for me, was Tyler Shaw at 40. I don't think Tyler Shaw solves the quarterback issue with this team. So you got Derek Carr with the injury, or we don't know if he's going to be there for week 1. But is Tyler Shaw going to be your franchise guy? I personally think no. I think you were better off taking best available edge here, best available corner, because there were some damn good ones here. Any position, even safety, even receiver, but anything but quarterback, because my thought process was if Derek Carr's out for a month, you give Rattler a slightly better team. I'm not saying he's the franchise guy either, but I just think he's better at this stage than Tyler Shaw is. And I think this team ultimately is going to have to take a quarterback next year no matter what. So I think it's just a waste of a 2nd round pick, and that's going to make them suffer, and I have to give them a C+. I can't justify giving them anything higher than a B just because of that pick, even though I think the rest of the draft was pretty solid. So then next we got the New York Giants. So I think the Giants front office and coaching staff ended up coming to an agreement here. They took Abdul Carter at 3, definitely the right pick. You did not want to take a quarterback there. But then they trade up and get their guy. There was a lot of Shador smoke this whole offseason. They took Jackson Dart. And I don't hate that they traded up to take a quarterback. So now you have a quarterback room. Obviously, you have Jameis, Russell, and Dart. But at least you got a guy who doesn't need to start all year. And you can put him in next year with Jameis off the books and maybe cutting Russ or whatever. But I like what they did there. They got their guy. And I think Dable can walk out of here happy. I think if they took a quarterback at 3 and his team really sucked next year, Dable would have been the scapegoat. And again, just pretty good moves here in the first. Scatabo in the 4th. Obviously, we saw what he could do at Arizona State. Could be a solid pick there. Darius Alexander at Toledo. I think I like that pick as well. So for that reason, I think this was a really solid draft for the Giants, and I'm gonna give them a solid B here. I mean, I'm not the biggest Jackson Dart believer. I think this is a good spot for him to go, but if I was a more of a Jackson Dart believer, I'd definitely trickle them into the B plus, A minus tier. But for my personal opinion on Dart, I have to give them a B. Just some reasoning there why they're B and not higher for any Giants fans who watch this video. And then for the Jets, Membu, definitely the right pick here at 7. Glad they didn't go quarterback. Could have gone tight end here, but it just seemed really early. And I think corner was too early here. But yeah, take Membu at 7. This guy has some crazy upside and could definitely be a generational type of tackle for this team and at least a starting tackle for this team for years to come. So then they do address tight end in the second round with Mason Taylor. He was definitely going to be a day 2 kind of guy, and I don't hate taking him here, but I think there is some capped upside here in comparison to some of the other tight ends in this class. But again, huge position of need, and I don't hate this pick. And then Azareye'h Thomas, I think this was a great pick in the 3rd round. Really athletic corner with a really fast 40 and like just some of those physical attributes you want to see in a corner and the athleticism. So I love their first 3 picks for like their needs, and they addressed their needs. They got guys with some high upside, obviously. And then I like Malachi Moore. I mean, I think even the guys like Arian Smith, and I mean, these guys could be contributors and at least rotational guys for this team. And overall, I think the Jets just made it out of here without forcing themselves to take a quarterback and do anything dumb. And I'm going to give them a B+. I think there's guys here who could definitely be starters for this team. And then next you got the Philadelphia Eagles. And here's another example of the rich getting richer. So Jihad Campbell falling to them at 31, home run pick. This guy, it was the best linebacker in this class, and they needed some help here in the front 7 with some key guys departing after the Super Bowl win. So huge home run pick, like I said. Makuba, safety out of Texas, another home run pick, another position in need. Just these 2 picks alone, like we talked about with KC, would have gave these guys an A for sure. And then I like Kyle McCord here. Another, like, I don't think he's going to pan out or anything, but just you lost Kenny Pickett. This is like one of those guys you can hopefully develop beyond Hurts and maybe be a backup quarterback. Cameron Williams in the 6th round, I thought was a steal. He's not the most polished tackle. I don't think he should have obviously gone in rounds 2 or 3, but round 6 felt way too low because this guy's got some crazy physical attributes, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's a starting tackle for this team in 2 or 3 years. So I really like that pick. Again, they needed some center help. Drew Kendall, good stuff. And again, just guys here in rounds 4 and 5. They really used their day 3 picks really wisely. Like, again, all these guys aren't going to make the team and pan out, but there's 2 or 3 in here who I could definitely see making the team and potentially being rotational kind of guys. So an already Super Bowl roster who's already very good. So I'm going to give them a B+ for sure. And the next we got the Pittsburgh Steelers. So I thought Derek Harmon here was a phenomenal pick. I'm glad they didn't force themselves to take a quarterback here in days 1 and 2. I still think they're going to make a run for Rodgers or Kirk. I mean, they're going to kind of have to, but Derek Harmon definitely needs some youth on this D-line. Caleb Johnson in the 3rd round was huge. They didn't have a 2nd round pick, so I was kind of worried they might not get a solid running back here in round 3, but Caleb Johnson in round 3 cannot complain. That's a really solid pick. And then Jack Sawyer. This guy, I've heard so many good things about from leadership perspective, from just his play on the field. And again, bringing some youth to this D-line, I think I wouldn't be surprised if, again, he's a starter for this team by the end of the year. And people are like, dang, how did this guy go in the 4th round? His athletic ceiling is definitely capped in comparison to some of these more like specimen kind of players in this draft class or in most draft classes. But I think this was a great pick in round 4. Round 5, Yaya Black, another solid pick who I think could contribute to this D line. And again, they do take a quarterback, but later, another low risk guy. He doesn't have to pan out. It's better than forcing yourself to take a guy at 1 or 4, one in rounds 1 or 3 you don't really like, and then just being a wasted pick on a team that needed had some holes to fill on the defensive side of things and at the running back position. So I really like the Steelers draft, and I'm definitely giving them an A- for sure. All right, so my video stopped recording a few minutes back, so I got to reverse back a bit here and start back at the Niners. So the Niners, this is a team that lost some key guys in defense and free agency this year, like Ward and Kinlaw, but they had really good draft position going in this draft and a lot of capital. So I figured they were going to do a good job of retooling that defense. And they did a good job with Mikael Williams at 11. This was a guy definitely not making it out of the top 15. It could have gone Jalen Walker here too, but again, end of the day, Mikael Williams, really solid addition to that defensive line. But I'm not the biggest fan of what they did here on day 2. Like, this was a team that definitely needed a lockdown corner, and they could afford to take the gamble on a guy like Will Johnson in the second round, or even a guy like Trey Amos, or even Azareye'h Thomas. But they end up going some front 7 help, which I mean is a need for this team. But is Nick Martin really that big of a need in comparison to a cornerback or a safety? Like, is Upton Stout a 5'10", 5'11", shorter guy to Western Kentucky going to solve your cornerback problems here at the end of the 3rd round? I just think this is a lackluster draft class with the high expectations I had for this front office and really this team to retool their defense. So for that reason, I have to give them a C+. And now looking at a team in that division that I thought had a phenomenal draft was Seattle. So Seattle, biggest need, easily O-line, and they addressed that immediately with Gray Zabel. This is a guy that's really versatile, insane upside, and should be a day 1 contributor for this team. Nick Emmanwori in the 2nd round, can't speak highly enough about this pick. Another first-round talent that slipped to the beginning of the 2nd round. This solves their needs in the secondary, or at least starts to solve their needs in the secondary, and he's a safety. You can kind of like play that hybrid safety position if need be, and I think it's gonna be a treat to watch him play in the NFL. And then you got Elijah Arroyo out of Miami, the tight end. Really good pick, another position of need. This gives them a receiving tight end who can make a difference on this team. And then Seattle, with picking up Darnold this offseason, we've seen Darnold kind of like not be good. And I'm glad they didn't force himself to take a quarterback in the 1st or 2nd. I think taking Jalen Milroe in the 3rd was really good because you don't need this guy to start week 1 or even year 1. And if he can develop, because he has that athletic upside, if he can develop here in Seattle, he might get a shot at the starting quarterback gig for him next year or in 2 years. So I thought that was a really solid 3rd round pick for him there. And they just had a really solid, even some of these like day 3 guys, I think there's rotational guys here who might make a difference. But just from these 4 picks alone to start days 1 and 2, I give Seattle an A. I thought this was a phenomenal draft with guys who are going to definitely contribute to this team. Okay, next we can move into the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So this team I thought was for sure going to address defense in the 1st round. And Emeka Egbuka was my wide receiver 2 over Matthew Golden coming into this draft. But I'm surprised he went to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers because I know Mike Evans is getting up there in age. Chris Godwin just got that extension. But did you really have to take a receiver here at 19? I mean, they got better in the receiver room. McMillan was a really good rookie last year. That's another reason I think was kind of unnecessary to go receiver here. I think they would have benefited by taking a corner here or even a safety like Emmanwori or a defensive edge. But ultimately, this is what they do. They go Egbuka. And like, I'm not hating on the player because I think he's a great player, but I just think it was more of a luxury pick for this team. But then I will say they spend their next 2 picks on corners. Benjamin Morrison, pretty high potential there for them to be a starting corner for this team. And that definitely earns them back some brownie points. And they come back here and take 2 front 7 guys, which again, another need. And then they take another receiver in the 7th. But it looked like they knew went into this draft knowing they want to go corner, get some front seven guys, and I guess receiver, and they took two of each without making any trades and just using their own draft capital. So honestly, even though the Luka pick was a little surprising to me and I think a lot of people, I do like this draft overall. I'm gonna give them a solid B here. Next, we got the Titans. Can't hate what the Titans did. Took Cam Ward at 1. That was like a lock, as we know as we've known for the last 3 to 4 months. Kevin Winston in this third round, insanely good pick. Needed a safety type of guy, or needed a guy in the secondary back there, and he's going to solve that for them, I think. Gunnar Helm in the fourth round, I thought was solid. Io Manor, fifth round. This was a guy that was mocked to go rounds 2 and 3 in a lot of drafts. Really speedy receiver out of Stanford. Adding some wide receiver talent to that room. I love that pick. I just think this was a really solid pick for this team, or draft overall. I mean, added another receiver out of Florida and a Shamir Dyke. So really like this draft. I think they did what they needed to do, and they're not going to be good next year just off Cam Warden's draft alone. But I think this was definitely a step in the right direction and setting them up for an even better offseason next year. But for that reason, giving them a B+. So similar to the Saints, I didn't know what the Commanders were going to do in the first round because they could have gone, honestly, any position except quarterback. This team's already pretty good, obviously, as we saw last year, but I was really excited to see how they were going to improve in this draft. And they go Josh Connerly in the first round, which is, I think, awesome. You're getting a tackle who's definitely first round worthy, in my opinion, who can be that blindside protector for Jaden. And Trey Amos in the second round, great pick. This was definitely a second round corner type of guy. They add a receiver in the fourth round, Jalen Lane, and they just add some other positions to need here in round 6 and 7. Again, we don't know if these guys will make differences on this team, but still, you're addressing linebacker and running back. And overall, I thought this was a pretty decent draft for the Commies. Nothing to rave about, but also nothing to hate about. So again, for that reason, a B. So yeah, these are my grades for this year's draft. I thought it was a really interesting one. Obviously, the Shador storyline was super interesting to keep up with, and there was some good talent here. Day 2 of this draft was awesome, I thought. And let me know, do you agree with what I graded your team? Are there any teams you think did better than I thought they did or worse than I thought they did? And yeah, let me know. And I'm excited to see how these guys perform here in the actual NFL season when they get their chance. But thanks for tuning in. And yeah, I'll catch y'all later.